Mike used to joke that retirement was just life without alarms or deadlines, unless you count the coffee pot timer. That first summer at the lake, he finally believed it. Every morning began the same way. A slow percolator hiss, the smell of pine and damp earth drifting through the open window, and Laura sitting on the porch in her robe, sketching the waterline in her notebook. No traffic, no conference calls, just the steady buzz of cicadas and the lazy slap of water against the dock. After 30 years in a cul-de-sac where the loudest sound was someone's lawn mower at 7 a.m., the quiet felt earned. They'd bought the cabin on a whim, our retirement project, Laura called it. 2 bedrooms, a faded red porch, and just enough yard to keep Mike busy without turning it into a second job. The property came with a small community association called Lakeshore Estates, which sounded fancy enough, but everyone assured them it was friendly and flexible. The welcome packet was only 6 pages long, mostly full of cheerful reminders about recycling and maintaining community aesthetics. Mike skimmed it once and filed it under things that don't matter when you mind your own business. On their first weekend, they unpacked what little they owned that didn't already have rust or sentimental value. An old rocking chair from Mike's mother, a box of Laura's cookbooks, and a new wreath she'd made from wildflowers picked near the highway. A pop of color, she said, hanging it on the door. The cabin deserves a little hello. Mike just smiled. He loved that she made every space look like a Norman Rockwell painting, except with more sarcasm. By late afternoon, the air smelled like charcoal and sunscreen. The lake shimmered the color of an old nickel. A few neighbors passed by and waved. A man in a fishing vest, a couple walking their golden retriever, and one woman in pressed khakis who slowed her SUV to a crawl. She rolled down the window with a practiced smile. "Afternoon. I'm Karen. I head the association here." Mike nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." Her eyes flicked toward the porch. "Lovely wreath," she said, voice bright as tinfoil. "We try to keep things cohesive around here. Earth tones, mostly. But I'm sure it'll all work out." Laura offered a friendly grin. "It's just flowers, nothing fancy." Karen's smile widened but didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. We just like to make sure everyone's decorations, complement the natural setting." She held up a clipboard. "I'll check the list later." After she drove off, Laura exhaled a laugh. "She has a clipboard. That's never a good sign." Mike shrugged. "Every neighborhood's got one. Better her than a raccoon problem." The rest of the weekend passed quietly. They painted the kitchen cabinets, cleaned the dock, and spent Sunday watching the sunset from matching lawn chairs. The air cooled, and for the first time in months, Mike felt his shoulders drop an inch. He thought about the phrase "a simpler life" and wondered if this was finally it. A week later, they drove back up for another weekend. The mailbox flag was raised. Inside sat a single envelope, printed in all caps. Lakeshore Estates Association Notice of Violation. Mike squinted at the header. "That's new." He tore it open. The letter was 3 paragraphs of bureaucratic poetry. "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that unauthorized exterior modifications have been made to the property at Lot 22, red porch, visible from road. All exterior decor must be pre-approved by the board to maintain visual harmony. Failure to comply may result in a fine of $75 and/or legal action. Sincerely, Karen L. Whitby, HOA President." Laura blinked. "Exterior decor? You think they mean the wreath? Or the chair?" Mike said. "Maybe harmony doesn't allow for rocking." He expected her to be furious, but instead she started laughing. $75 for flowers. That's cheaper than a bouquet. Mike smiled, though his jaw tightened. "I'll call Monday. Must be a mix-up." When Monday came, he dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. After 2 rings, a bright voice answered. "Lakeshore Estates, Karen speaking." "Hi, this is Mike Andrews, cabin lot 22. I got a letter about a violation." "Oh yes," she said cheerfully. "That would be the decorative additions. They weren't on file. They're a wreath and a chair." "Right," Karen said. "But per bylaw 14B, all exterior items must be approved to maintain community standards." Mike rubbed his forehead. It's a chair, not a gazebo. Well, technically any visible furnishing counts as an exterior item. We just like to make sure everything matches our color palette. Your palette? Natural hues, she said. Taupe, beige, cedar. Think harmony. He stared out the window at the gray lake. Ma'am, the chair's brown. Can't get more natural than wood. Karen's tone softened, like she was explaining algebra to a stubborn child. I'm sure it's lovely, but we have to treat everyone equally. You can file a decor approval form if you'd like to appeal. Mike thanked her and hung up. Laura was making tea. How'd that go? She has a color palette, he said. Our chair's not on it. Laura tilted her head. Is she serious? Dead serious. Wants a form filed. For a chair. She sipped her tea, thinking, maybe we should frame the form next to the wreath. They laughed, but by Wednesday another envelope arrived. This time the fine was already applied. Mike noticed Karen had handwritten, "See me for compliance guidance." In the margin, complete with a smiley face. The next weekend, Karen showed up in person. She had a clipboard and a small digital camera slung around her neck. "Morning," she called, stepping onto the gravel path. "Just doing our monthly inspection." Laura set down her coffee. "Do you usually inspect people's porches?" "Only when there are outstanding issues." Karen crouched, snapped a photo of the chair, then straightened. "This one's quite nice. It's just not in the records." Mike folded his arms. "You keep records of chairs?" "Well, we try to avoid a patchwork aesthetic," she said, using air quotes. "One person puts out a rocking chair. Next thing you know, there's a hammock. It's a slippery slope." Laura bit her lip, trying not to laugh. A hammock epidemic. Terrifying. Karen didn't smile. "I'll note your attitude in the report." "Do that," Mike said evenly. "Would you like a coffee while you write it up?" She blinked, uncertain whether he was serious. "No, thank you. I have several other properties to visit." When she left, Laura sat back in the chair, the unapproved one, and said, "You think she measures the width of mailboxes too?" "Probably," Mike said. "I'll build a smaller one just to mess with her." For the rest of the month, they joked about it, but every time the mail came, Laura hesitated before opening it. Each letter sounded more official than the last. Pending fine escalation. Failure to comply. Potential legal review. The tone of bureaucracy was oddly personal, as if Karen had discovered a hobby that involved stationery and passive aggression. One morning, Mike found Laura sitting at the table with the latest notice, unread. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I'm fine. It's just, we bought this place for peace, not paperwork." He put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll handle it." That evening, the sun dipped low, painting the lake in gold. Mike grilled burgers while Laura swept the porch, the offending chair rocking in the breeze. For a moment it felt normal again. Then the wind shifted, carrying a faint click-click sound. He turned. Karen's SUV idled at the curb, window down, phone raised. She was taking pictures again. Mike stared, half amused, half bewildered. "You think she's building a scrapbook?" Laura waved cheerfully toward the car. "Make sure you get my good side." Karen's SUV rolled away, dust curling behind her like smoke. Laura shook her head, laughing in disbelief. "I swear, that woman's going to call the cops next." Mike smiled, flipping a burger. "If she does, I hope they like medium rare." But 2 days later, another letter appeared. This one marked urgent notice. Failure to cooperate. The language was harsher, the fine doubled, and at the bottom was Karen's signature in bold pen strokes. Mike stared at it for a long moment, then folded it carefully and set it on the table. "That letter," he said quietly, "changed everything." The next morning started with the sound of gravel crunching and the low hum of an engine. Mike looked up from his coffee to see Karen's silver SUV creeping along the lane like a shark that had smelled blood in the water. She stopped in front of their cabin, window down, clipboard in hand. "Good morning," she called brightly. "Just conducting follow-up inspections." Laura, still in her robe, raised an eyebrow. You mean you're back for the chair? Karen smiled tightly. And the wreath. I did send another notice. Mike leaned against the porch post, mug in hand. We got it. Right next to the one about our non-compliant porch environment. Karen's pen hovered over her pad. Sarcasm won't make this easier, Mr. Andrews. He almost laughed. Didn't expect it to. She took a few pictures, scribbled something, and drove off, her taillights flashing like punctuation marks. Laura sipped her tea, shaking her head. That woman has more clipboards than sense. That was the official beginning of what Mike later called the petty wars. Every week brought a new envelope and a fresh accusation. One notice claimed the chair was unapproved furniture. Another accused them of failure to submit decorative items for review. By the third week, the fine had doubled, and an attached flyer announced Community Beautification Weekend. Compliance check included. The absurdity was almost impressive. Laura taped the letters to the fridge like they were report cards. If we get one more, she joked, I'll need a bigger magnet. But Mike didn't find it funny anymore. He'd seen bureaucracy before in the Navy, but at least there it came with discipline and logic. This was just personal power in a cardigan. Things escalated when Karen began taking photos from the road at all hours. One morning, Mike caught the flash through the blinds. It's 6:30, he muttered. Who enforces harmony before sunrise? Laura peeked outside. Harmony never sleeps. By the end of the week, the HOA newsletter arrived, printed on thick paper with patriotic clip art. The lead article was titled, Preserving Our Neighborhood's Integrity. Below it, a paragraph that didn't name them but didn't have to. Some residents have introduced unsanctioned decor that detracts from the natural simplicity we all cherish. Let's keep our community united in aesthetic values. Mike folded the page neatly and slid it under the salt shaker. We've been newslettered. Laura laughed. At least they didn't put your picture. They didn't need to. Everyone knows who has the chair. Later that afternoon, he mowed the small strip of grass near the porch just to keep his hands busy. A few neighbors waved sympathetically. One of them, a heavy-set man in a fishing vest, ambled over. You're the new folks getting the Karen treatment, huh? Mike smiled wearily. That obvious? Oh yeah. She fined me last year for a flag that was too faded to be patriotic. I told her it's faded because it's old. She said, so are the bylaws, but we still follow those. He chuckled and patted Mike's shoulder. Best of luck. You'll need it. The following weekend, Laura hosted a small cookout, just burgers and beer with a couple of friends from town. Around 7, Karen's SUV rolled by again. The headlights paused, then reversed. Evening, she called from the window. Just a reminder that gatherings of more than 6 people require prior approval. Laura blinked. Approval to eat dinner? Karen gave a gentle shrug. Technically, it's an outdoor event. Mike leaned over the railing. Technically, it's Tuesday. She frowned, wrote something on her clipboard, and drove off. 2 hours later, the community Facebook page lit up with a post from Lakeshore HOA official account. Unregistered social events may disrupt neighborhood harmony. Please be considerate of others. Beneath it, a blurry photo of Mike's porch, clearly taken that night. Laura stared at her phone. She posted about us? Mike smirked. Looks like we're influencers now. He left a comment under the post. Thank you for the free advertisement for our burgers. They were delicious. By morning, the post was gone. So was the HOA account. Still, the next letter came with even greater enthusiasm. It cited continued noncompliance and hinted at further action pending. Laura taped it next to the others. Our wall's turning into a shrine, she said. We should start charging admission. Mike chuckled, but a dull irritation simmered beneath. He'd spent a career fixing problems, engines, schedules, people, and yet he couldn't fix this kind of nonsense. He could fix a leaky pipe, but not a leaky ego. A week later, he was sitting on the dock when Laura came running, out of breath and laughing so hard she could barely speak. You're not going to believe this, she wheezed. She called the cops. Mike blinked. What? The sheriff. Said there were unauthorized occupants at our address. He stood up slowly. You're joking. Nope. He's on his way. Sure enough, 15 minutes later a county cruiser pulled into the drive. The officer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stepped out and tipped his hat. Evenin'. Got a call about possible trespassers at this property. Mike tried to keep a straight face. You're looking at them. Laura waved from the porch, still laughing. Would you like to see the deed? The officer chuckled awkwardly. Figured it was something like that. I've had a few calls from this HOA before. He took a quick look at their IDs, radioed it in, then said, all clear. I'll note this as a false report. Before he left, Karen's SUV appeared again at the end of the drive. She rolled down her window, all sweetness. Everything all right, officer? He looked at her for a long second. Ma'am, this property belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. You might want to double-check your records before calling next time. Karen's smile faltered. Oh, I was just concerned for the community's safety. Understood, he said with a tone that meant he didn't. He nodded to Mike. You folks have a good night. As the cruiser pulled away, Karen lingered another beat, then drove off, tires crunching faster than usual. Laura exhaled a laugh that turned into a sigh. She actually called the cops on us. At our own cabin. Mike rubbed his temple. She's officially gone pro. The story spread through the neighborhood faster than pollen. Neighbors waved differently now. Some amused, others quietly supportive. A woman down the lane left a note in their mailbox. Karen fined me once for hanging wind chimes. Hang in there. Pun intended. Even the mailman had opinions. You folks should get hazard pay, he said, handing them the next envelope. You're keeping me employed. That letter, surprisingly, wasn't another fine. It was an invitation. HOA monthly meeting discussion of community compliance issues. Attendance encouraged. Laura laughed. She wants to discuss us in person now. Mike nodded slowly. Good. Let's see how she likes an audience. They attended out of sheer curiosity. The meeting was held in a beige rec hall with folding chairs and a tray of donuts that had clearly seen better days. About 15 residents sat in a semicircle while Karen stood at the front, framed by a projector showing a PowerPoint labeled, Maintaining Harmony. She clicked through slides of mailboxes, lawns, and porches, pausing dramatically on one photo, their porch. As you can see, she said, small deviations lead to visual inconsistency. It's not personal, it's about order. Someone in the back raised a hand. That looks fine to me. Karen pursed her lips. We can't allow exceptions. Another voice chimed in. Didn't you just repaint your fence bright beige? That's an approved tone, she snapped. Mike exchanged a look with Laura, who fought back a grin. The meeting descended into polite chaos. Questions, murmurs, laughter. For every rule Karen quoted, someone had a counterexample. By the end, she declared, this conversation will continue privately. When they got home, Mike felt something shift. The annoyance was still there, but underneath it was something colder and clearer. The absurdity had reached its limit. They'd been polite, patient, even funny, but enough was enough. He looked at Laura, who was untapping the latest letter from the fridge. You know what? She said quietly. If she loves paperwork so much, maybe it's time we start reading it too. Mike smiled, slow and steady. Now that, he said, sounds like harmony I can get behind. Outside, the lake shimmered in the last light of evening. Somewhere down the road, Karen's SUV idled, headlights off. It was becoming a ritual, her watching, them pretending not to care. But this time, when she finally pulled away, Laura turned to Mike and said, let's see how deep her bylaws really go. He nodded, eyes glinting. I thought that was the end of it, he said softly. But I was wrong. For the next few days, the air around the lake felt different. The usual quiet hum of sprinklers and cicadas had been replaced by the kind of silence that follows a neighborhood scandal. Every time Mike stepped onto the porch, he caught glimpses of blinds shifting and curtains fluttering shut. Apparently, the couple the cops were called on had become the local campfire story. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so exhausting. Laura handled it better than he did. She had that calm schoolteacher poise that could turn a shouting match into a parent-teacher conference. After the meeting, she spent her mornings in the kitchen with a cup of tea and a stack of papers. The HOA charter, the county zoning documents, and a binder full of policies Karen had distributed over the years. It looked like homework for a bureaucracy class. Mike teased her about it. "You planning to get a degree in neighborhood law?" She smiled without looking up. "Nope, just checking who's actually in charge around here." By lunchtime, she had a notepad covered in scribbles, arrows, and page numbers. "Did you know," she said, "these bylaws expire every 5 years unless renewed by a county filing? Does Karen know that? Probably not. Or maybe she does, and she's hoping no one else does." Mike sat down beside her, scanning the document. The print was small enough to make his eyes ache. "So, what happens if she didn't renew them?" Laura looked up, grinning. "Then technically there's no active HOA authority right now. They can collect dues, but they can't enforce fines." He blinked. "You mean all those letters, all those fines? Empty threats, legally meaningless." For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the silence breaking into slow, incredulous laughter. Mike slapped the table. "You're telling me we got the cops called on us by a woman running an imaginary government? Looks that way." He leaned back, shaking his head. "I've fought bureaucracy before, but this might be the first time I've seen someone build their own dictatorship out of printer paper." Laura poured him a cup of tea and pushed it toward him. "Then let's use her favorite weapon." That afternoon, they started gathering everything. Every letter, every photo Karen had taken, every voicemail she'd left about aesthetic violations. Laura organized them chronologically, like evidence in a courtroom drama. Mike scanned the county's website, printing out proof that the HOA's corporate registration had lapsed 6 months ago. By evening, their dining table looked like a crime scene made of paper. Mike chuckled softly. "Feels weird to be fighting back with forms instead of wrenches." Laura smiled. "You fix engines. I fix nonsense." Over the next few days, they quietly reached out to other residents. Started small, a friendly chat at the mailbox, a wave by the dock. Then a few phone calls. The stories poured out. "She fined me for having a pumpkin on the porch in November," said one neighbor. "She told my husband to move his truck because it looked too blue," said another. "She measured my lawn with a ruler." Every story came with a mix of disbelief and relief, like everyone had been waiting for someone else to say it first. By Friday, half the street knew the bylaws had expired. Someone even joked about printing t-shirts, "Lakeshore Estates, where rules go to die." Laura drafted a formal complaint to the county property board, citing expired registration, misuse of homeowner funds, and repeated attempts at unlawful enforcement. She included copies of Karen's letters, the sheriff's incident report, and a polite but firm cover letter. "We appreciate the board's attention to this matter. The community deserves clarity and fair governance. We request an immediate review of Lakeshore Estates Association's current legal standing. Respectfully, Laura and Michael Andrews." Mike read it twice and smiled. "You sound like a lawyer and a kindergarten teacher had a baby. That's the tone bureaucrats fear most." She mailed it certified the next morning just to make it official. As they walked back from the mailbox, the air felt lighter. The lake shimmered in the distance, a soft breeze rustling through the pine trees. For the first time in weeks, the place felt like theirs again. 2 days later, Karen appeared while Mike was tightening a hinge on the dock gate. She stood at the edge of the gravel path, clipboard in hand, eyes squinting like she was trying to read his soul. "Afternoon, Mr. Andrews. I noticed you didn't attend last night's compliance meeting." He didn't look up, didn't get the invite. Maybe it wasn't pre-approved. Karen ignored the jab. "We're making progress on community unity, but I'll need you to remove that wreath by the end of the week." Still in violation. Mike stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Karen, let me ask you something. When's the last time the HOA renewed its county charter?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" The legal renewal. The filing that gives you the right to send all those letters. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. I'm sure our treasurer handles that sort of thing. Good to hear. Because I'd hate for all those fines to be, invalid. Her face flushed a color that wasn't on any approved palette. We'll review it internally. Perfect. You do that. She turned on her heel and marched back to her SUV, tires spitting gravel as she sped away. When Laura came out onto the porch, she asked, "What was that about?" Mike smiled. "Let's just say I planted a seed." Over the next week, small signs of panic began to ripple through the neighborhood. Karen sent a mass email about administrative updates. The HOA website went temporarily offline. A few board members quietly resigned. Someone even slipped an anonymous note under their door that said simply, "Thank you." One evening, Mike and Laura sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed over the water. The wreath swayed gently in the breeze, defiant and beautiful. "You think she'll back down?" Laura asked. "Maybe. Or maybe she'll double down. Either way, we're ready." Laura smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Who knew retirement would turn into a legal thriller? Mike chuckled. At least the villains are local. The next morning, a new letter appeared, but this one wasn't from Karen. It came from the county property board, stamped with the official seal. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, we acknowledge receipt of your complaint regarding Lakeshore Estates Association. Upon review, the association's corporate registration and authority to enforce bylaws appear to have expired as of the previous fiscal quarter. A temporary suspension of enforcement rights will be issued pending reapplication." Mike let out a low whistle. "You hear that? We just grounded the HOA." Laura grinned. No fines, no forms, just facts. But they didn't gloat, at least not publicly. They stayed quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. A few days later, Karen called for an emergency meeting. The email sounded desperate. Attendance mandatory to address misinformation. Laura raised an eyebrow. "Misinformation? Translation," Mike said. "She's realized the empire's crumbling." That night, the street buzzed with gossip. People whispered on porches, lights flickering like fireflies. Everyone was waiting for the showdown. Before heading inside, Mike stood for a moment on the porch, looking out over the lake. The air was still, the kind of heavy calm that comes before a storm. Somewhere down the road, he could hear Karen's SUV door slam. He turned to Laura, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You know," he said, "I think it's time we give the good people of Lakeshore Estates a little civics lesson." She grinned, eyes gleaming. "You mean a presentation?" "I mean a reckoning paperwork edition." Inside, the stack of printed emails and letters sat neatly in a folder labeled Exhibit A. Laura placed it in her tote bag, zipped it shut, and said, "Let's go restore harmony." The lake reflected a strip of orange moonlight as they locked the cabin door behind them. The night was quiet except for the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the faint hum of Karen's SUV idling at the end of the road, waiting. Mike smiled to himself, almost amused. They have no idea what's coming. The emergency HOA meeting looked less like an official gathering and more like a scene from a small-town sitcom. The rec hall lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the folding tables arranged in crooked rows. Someone had brought half a box of glazed donuts and a jug of off-brand coffee that smelled faintly of mildew. Every chair was filled. Residents in polos, retirees with crossed arms, even teenagers dragged along by curious parents. The air carried the unmistakable scent of drama about to boil over. Karen stood at the front, posture rigid, face framed by an overworked smile. She wore a pink blazer and clutched a stack of papers like they were holy scripture. Behind her, a projector flickered with the HOA logo, slightly off-center on the wall. She cleared her throat. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on such short notice." From the back, someone whispered, "We didn't really have a choice," followed by a chuckle. Karen ignored it. Mike and Laura sat near the middle, side by side. Laura's tote bag rested at her feet, bulging with the now famous binder labeled Exhibit A. Mike could see the corners of the county letter peeking out like a quiet secret. Karen began. There have been some misunderstandings circulating about our association's authority. I want to clarify that the HOA remains in full effect and that any rumors suggesting otherwise are inaccurate. Laura raised her hand. So, to be clear, you're saying the HOA's bylaws are active and enforceable? Karen hesitated. Yes, of course. They're part of our community foundation. Laura opened the binder with theatrical slowness and pulled out a paper. Because I have a letter here from the County Property Board confirming that your corporate registration expired 6 months ago, and that enforcement authority has been suspended pending renewal. The room fell silent. You could hear the squeak of the ceiling fan and someone's phone buzzing quietly. Karen's face froze, the smile finally cracking. That letter must be a mistake. Mike leaned back, voice calm but carrying. That's what the sheriff thought too when you called him to remove us from our own property. Turns out that was also a mistake. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. One of the older men near the back clapped once, softly, like punctuation. Karen straightened her papers. This is highly unprofessional. You can't just bring private correspondence to a public meeting. Actually, Laura said, smiling sweetly, we can. It's public record now. A younger resident raised a hand. Wait, so all the fines we've been paying, technically invalid, Mike said. You've been donating to a hobby. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, half outrage, half glee. One woman shouted, "She fined me for wind chimes." Another yelled, "I want my $80 back." Karen's voice strained to regain control. Please, everyone, let's remain civil. These are complicated administrative issues. Someone muttered, not as complicated as repainting your own fence beige. That broke whatever composure she had left. That fence color was approved, she snapped, slamming a hand on the table. The projector flickered as if embarrassed for her. Laura stayed calm, flipping another page. Actually, per your own bylaws, color approval requires 2 board signatures. Yours is the only one on file. That's when the murmurs turned into outright laughter. A few people started filming on their phones. Karen's face turned the shade of a stop sign. Are you trying to humiliate me? She hissed. No, Laura said gently. We're trying to remind you that power doesn't work one way, especially not when it's expired. The room buzzed with quiet applause. Even the coffee urn seemed to hiss approval. Karen's assistant, a nervous man in a vest, whispered something to her, but she waved him off. I won't stand here and be disrespected by people who don't understand how community works. Mike folded his arms. We understand perfectly. We just prefer communities that don't involve surveillance and fake legal letters. That was when someone in the doorway coughed. Every head turned. It was the same sheriff who had visited their cabin weeks earlier. He gave a polite nod. Evenin', folks. Got a call about a potential disturbance. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. Karen's voice went up an octave. This is a lawful meeting. Didn't say it wasn't. The sheriff looked around, eyes landing on Mike. You again. Mike smiled. We like to keep things interesting. The sheriff walked up to the front, scanning the room. So what's the problem this time? Laura handed him the county letter. Just showing the neighbors some paperwork. He skimmed it, then looked at Karen. Ma'am, she's right. Counties suspended your authority till renewal. You can still hold meetings, but you can't issue fines or call in enforcement. Least not officially. Karen stammered. But this is outrageous. He shrugged. Seems pretty straightforward to me. You'll want to clear it up with the clerk before sending more of those letters. He tipped his hat toward Mike and Laura. You folks keep your chairs and wreaths. They're fine by me. He turned and left, leaving behind a stunned silence. The second the door closed, the room exploded into laughter, clapping, and a few whoops of victory. Karen gathered her papers with trembling hands, face pale. This meeting is adjourned, she muttered, storming out with her assistant trailing like a scolded puppy. Mike leaned over to Laura. You think we should have brought popcorn? She grinned. Next time. As they stood to leave, residents surrounded them, shaking hands, patting backs. Someone said, "About time somebody stood up to her." Another whispered, "You two should run the HOA yourselves." Mike just chuckled. "We prefer hobbies that don't require clipboards." Outside, the night air was cool, the sky clear. A few neighbors lingered in the parking lot, trading stories and laughter under the streetlights. Someone even started a mock poll. "How many of you got a fine from Karen this year?" Nearly every hand went up. Back at the cabin, the porch light glowed softly. The rocking chair creaked as Laura sat down, exhaling deeply. Mike joined her, handing her a cold drink. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt peaceful again. Then the phone buzzed. An email notification from the HOA mailing list. The subject line read, "Temporary Policy Notice." Mike opened it, skimming. "Pending administrative review. All properties must comply under interim policy guidelines." He raised an eyebrow. "Interim policy? She just won't quit." Laura laughed. "You've got to admire the persistence of delusion." The next morning, the gossip mill was in full spin. Someone had uploaded a snippet of the meeting to Facebook. The clip of Laura calmly producing the county letter had already gathered dozens of likes and comments. "Queen behavior. Finally someone did it." One caption simply said, "The day Karen lost control." Karen, predictably, responded with a long post about misinformation campaigns and personal vendettas. But it was too late. The narrative had shifted. Neighbors were joking openly, waving at Mike and Laura with conspiratorial grins. Even the mailman saluted as he dropped off a bundle of official-looking envelopes. Only this time they were from the county, not the HOA. At lunch, Mike checked his phone again. The county had issued a public notice confirming the suspension of HOA enforcement rights. In bureaucratic terms, it was a knockout punch. Karen's kingdom was officially on hold. Laura read it over his shoulder and smiled. "Looks like harmony just got restored." Mike nodded. "For now." He stood, stretching, watching the sunlight glint off the lake. "At this point, I've got to ask, have you ever dealt with an HOA like this? Drop your story in the comments, hit subscribe if you love poetic justice, and let's see how many of us have survived HOA brutality." He turned to Laura, lowering his voice again. "You think she'll retaliate?" "Oh, she'll try," Laura said, eyes twinkling. "But I've got more forms than she's got nerve." That night, as they sat on the porch, the faint rumble of an SUV drifted up the road. Karen drove past slowly, face pale in the headlights, pretending not to look. Laura raised her glass in a mock toast. "To harmony," Mike grinned. "And to paperwork, the universal equalizer." Karen's taillights disappeared into the dark. Mike leaned back in the rocking chair, feeling the breeze off the lake, the smell of pine and coffee in the air. It had been a long war of absurdities, but the tide had turned. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that one more twist was waiting in the mail. He smiled faintly, almost amused by the thought. Then I got the letter that changed everything again. The letter came on a Tuesday, which was fitting. Trouble always seemed to prefer Tuesdays. Mike found it wedged halfway out of the mailbox, edges damp from the morning dew. He could tell by the bold type and heavy paper stock that it wasn't a friendly note. Laura was on the porch, sipping coffee, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "Is it from her again?" she asked without looking up. He held it up to the light. "County seal on the corner. Looks official." She set her mug down. "Well, at least it's not printed on pastel stationery with clip art." He tore it open carefully, scanning the first few lines. Then a slow grin spread across his face. "You're not gonna believe this. They've suspended the HOA's enforcement powers, indefinitely." Laura blinked. "Indefinitely?" "Yep. The board failed to submit proper renewal documentation for 2 consecutive quarters. They can't issue fines, letters, or notices until further notice." For a moment, she just stared, processing the irony. Then she started laughing, the kind of laugh that makes your shoulders shake. "You mean to tell me Karen spent months threatening people with paperwork that doesn't even count?" "Yep. She's been writing fan fiction." That night, they brought out a bottle of cheap champagne they'd been saving for something worth celebrating. The cork hit the ceiling, bounced off the light fixture, and nearly scared the cat to death. Laura poured 2 glasses and raised hers. To the rule follower who learned the rules better than the ruler. Mike clinked his glass to hers. To polite paperwork. Over the next week, Lakeshore Estates became the calmest place it had been in years. No letters in the mailboxes, no cars idling at dawn. The neighborhood group chat turned from passive-aggressive notes about lawn heights to actual conversation. Someone posted a picture of their dog in a Christmas sweater in May. People replied with heart emojis instead of lectures about seasonal decor. Karen, however, was nowhere to be seen. Her SUV stayed parked in her driveway, blinds perpetually drawn. Rumor had it she'd been asked by the county to step down while they reviewed the HOA's finances. The treasurer quit 2 days later, citing stress. By Friday, the rest of the board had resigned in what the email called a spiritual transition. The next week, an envelope arrived, different handwriting this time. It was from the remaining residents, a friendly petition to reconstitute the HOA under fair and transparent leadership. At the bottom, someone had scribbled, "We'd love for Laura to join." She read it twice before setting it down. "You think they're serious?" Mike smirked. "You've basically become the local folklore. The woman who beat the HOA with its own rules." "I don't want to run it," she said, shaking her head. "I just want peace." "That's exactly why they want you." After some convincing, she agreed to attend the first Reformation meeting. This one was held outdoors by the lake, in the open air with folding lawn chairs instead of stiff rec hall seats. The vibe was casual, burgers sizzling, kids tossing a frisbee. Someone brought brownies. The new agenda: electing a temporary leadership committee to manage shared maintenance and dock scheduling. When it came time for nominations, a gray-haired neighbor stood up. "I nominate Laura Andrews. She's got common sense and she doesn't talk down to people." There was a round of murmured agreement. Laura laughed, flustered. "I appreciate that, but I'm not exactly a politician." Another resident piped up. "Good. We've had enough of those." She accepted on one condition: that there'd be no clipboards, no secret fines, and no harmony policies. Instead, she suggested a digital notice board for friendly reminders and monthly potlucks to keep communication open. The motion passed unanimously. When the meeting ended, Mike leaned over and whispered, "Congratulations, Madam President." "Don't start," she said, laughing. "If I ever show up in a pastel blazer, shoot me." Word spread fast. The mood around the neighborhood shifted from tense to oddly festive. People started fixing up their porches again. Wind chimes, garden gnomes, bright flags fluttering in the breeze. One man even installed a pink flamingo pair, just to test the new regime. Laura stopped by his yard and gave a thumbs up. "Approved," she said. Meanwhile, Karen's beige fence began to peel in wide strips. Mike couldn't help noticing that she hadn't repainted it. Maybe she'd run out of approved colors. Maybe she just didn't have the heart for it anymore. Every few days, her SUV rolled slowly past their house. She didn't stop. Sometimes she gave a polite nod. Other times, nothing at all. Then, one evening, a new letter appeared in the mailbox. Mike felt a small twist of irritation before realizing the handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, flowing cursive. It was from the County Property Board again. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, we appreciate your cooperation and documentation in the recent review. As a result of your submission, the board has identified procedural irregularities and has chosen to implement stricter oversight across multiple local HOAs. Your efforts have contributed to broader community accountability." He handed it to Laura with a grin. "Look at you, changing county policy from a kitchen table." She smiled. "All I wanted was to keep my wreath." That weekend, they decided to host a small cookout, a sort of peace offering for the entire neighborhood. They sent invitations on plain paper that read, "No forms, no fines, just food." By sunset, half the community had shown up. There were kids playing tag between the mailboxes, music humming from a speaker, and laughter echoing across the lake. Someone even brought fireworks, tiny sparklers that fizzled in the twilight. As Mike flipped burgers, one of the older neighbors approached him with a beer. "You two saved this place, you know?" He chuckled. "We didn't save it. We just reminded people that it belonged to them." Later, as the night wound down, Laura stood near the porch, talking with the sheriff, who'd stopped by to grab a plate. "I hear the HOA's been on its best behavior," he said with a grin. "So far," she replied. "You ever notice how quiet it gets once you take away someone's clipboard?" He laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." Before he left, he glanced at the wreath hanging proudly on the door, the same one that had started it all. "Still looks legal to me," he said, tipping his hat. After the guests left, Mike and Laura sat together on the porch steps, feet bare, watching the last embers die in the grill. The lake reflected 1,000 pinpricks of starlight. For the first time in months, there was no sense of waiting for the next envelope, no tension humming beneath the surface, just the soft rhythm of frogs and crickets. Mike reached over and took her hand. "You realize you just pulled off the cleanest revenge story in HOA history." She smiled. "It wasn't revenge. It was just correction. Feels like justice to me." "Poetic justice," she said, finishing his thought. They sat there for a while, quiet and content, the breeze lifting the edges of the paper still stacked neatly inside. The old letters, the evidence, the now irrelevant finds. Mike thought about burning them, but somehow it felt better to keep them. A trophy shelf for patience. Before heading in, Laura looked back at the porch. The chair rocked gently in the night air, as if moved by an invisible hand. "You think she'll ever let it go?" Mike shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe she'll run for HOA again someday. But this time she'll have to get approval first." Laura laughed, shaking her head. "You're terrible." "Yeah. But at least I'm in compliance." She leaned against him, eyes half closed, voice soft. "You know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "We didn't yell. We didn't break anything. We just read the fine print." He smiled, kissing her hair. "The paperwork revolution." Out by the road, a single car drove past slowly. The headlights swept across the cabin and caught the wreath in their glow. For just a second, it shimmered, bright and defiant, the symbol of everything they'd fought for, peace earned the hard way. Mike raised his glass toward it, half a toast, half a salute. To peace, to patience, and to the woman who made bureaucracy blush. Laura clinked her glass against his, eyes twinkling. "And to the chair that started it all." The night folded around them, quiet, calm, and finally their own. Autumn came early that year. The air thinned, the lake grew still, and the trees along the shoreline began trading green for copper. The kind of mornings that used to feel tense now felt tranquil again. Coffee steam curling in the cool air, birds fussing in the reeds, the sound of the porch chair creaking like an old friend settling in for a chat. Life, after months of HOA theatrics, had finally gone back to its natural rhythm. Mike liked to say peace didn't arrive with a bang. It tiptoed in when no one was watching. He woke earlier these days, not because of worry, but because the quiet begged to be enjoyed. The mailbox stood like a reformed troublemaker at the end of the drive, empty except for the occasional fishing magazine or catalog. No pastel envelopes. No legal jargon pretending to be important. Laura would join him on the porch after sunrise, barefoot, hair messy from sleep, smiling in that small, content way that meant she was still surprised by how calm things had become. She'd read the news on her tablet, occasionally snorting at some headline about chaos elsewhere in the world, then glance at the still lake and murmur, "Imagine worrying about that when people used to fight over chair colors here." He'd laugh. "We've lived through worse. We've lived through Karen." If the old HOA era was a storm, what came after felt like a fresh, warm dawn. The new committee, the one Laura reluctantly agreed to chair temporarily, wasn't so much an HOA as it was a loose collection of neighbors who believed in mowing their lawns when they felt like it and minding their own business otherwise. They renamed it the Lakeshore Council mostly as a joke, but it stuck. The meetings were informal, usually around someone's fire pit, no clipboards, no donuts older than the minutes themselves. They'd share updates on dock maintenance, swap recipes, or plan the next potluck. Instead of fines, people offered favors. I'll fix your fence if you lend me your ladder. Harmony, it turned out, didn't need bylaws. Just decency. Karen was still around, of course. You don't erase a personality that determined overnight. But she was quieter now, like a retired queen living in self-imposed exile 2 streets over. Occasionally, her SUV would appear near the mailbox cluster, windows rolled up, pretending to be out for a casual drive. The neighborhood tolerated her like you tolerate an unpredictable weather pattern. You couldn't control it, but at least you could prepare for it. Laura, to her credit, never gloated. When people joked about the fall of the empire, she'd wave it off with a smile. We're all neighbors, she'd say. We just needed a reminder that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. That line made it into local legend. Someone even put it on a t-shirt for the next lake barbecue. By November, life at the cabin had found a rhythm so steady it almost felt unreal. Mornings meant coffee and crossword puzzles. Afternoons meant fixing small things that didn't need fixing. The gutter that dripped even when it wasn't raining, the creaky hinge on the dock gate, the mailbox flag that no longer stayed up. Laura spent her days baking again. Her compliance cookies, still a neighborhood favorite, shaped like little stop signs with the word relax written in icing. Every once in a while, someone new would move into the area, blissfully unaware of the community's dramatic past. They'd see Laura at the store or on the walking path and ask, "So, how's the neighborhood?" She'd smile politely and say, "Peaceful now. Took a few meetings to get there." The old tension had turned into a kind of local folklore. The Great Wreath Incident, as some called it, was told and retold around campfires and community gatherings, each version slightly exaggerated. In one telling, Karen had brought 2 police cars. In another, the sheriff gave Laura a medal for bravery in the face of bureaucracy. Mike never corrected the stories. He figured legends deserved a little embellishment. On colder nights, they'd light the fireplace inside the cabin, the same spot where stacks of HOA letters had once sat like powder kegs. Now the mantel was lined with framed photos, neighbors laughing at summer cookouts, a sunset over the lake, and one picture Laura loved most. Her and Mike sitting on the porch, the famous wreath behind them, both smiling in disbelief that something so small had caused such a fuss. One evening, as they sat watching the fire, Laura said, "You know, I think the best part wasn't winning. It was realizing we never had to fight in the first place." Mike nodded slowly. "You're saying we could have ignored her from day one?" "Not exactly. I think sometimes you have to stand your ground so that everyone else remembers they can, too." He smiled. Spoken like a true rebel bureaucrat. She threw a pillow at him. "Says the man who built a case file thicker than a phone book." They laughed until tears welled up, the kind of laughter that clears the air. Outside, the wind rattled the last leaves loose from the trees, scattering them across the gravel. Winter rolled in with its usual hush. The lake froze along the edges, the mornings frosted white, the smell of chimney smoke sweet and heavy. The wreath was swapped out for a winter version. Pine cones and ribbon, carefully chosen by Laura and proudly hung on the same nail. Mike made a point of checking the mail each day, still half expecting to find one more pink envelope with Karen's name on it. But there were only postcards from friends and the occasional holiday sale flyer. Once, around Christmas, they ran into Karen at the local grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a puffy coat that swallowed her posture. She gave a curt nod. "Morning," she said quietly. Laura smiled. "Morning. You keeping well?" Karen hesitated, then sighed. "Trying. The county made me take a governance course." "That's good," Laura said. "Bet you'll ace it." Karen gave a half smile. "You always were the teacher type." Then, after a pause, she added softly, "The place looks nice. The wreath suits it." "Thank you," Laura said simply. "You're welcome to stop by sometime." Karen nodded, looking almost grateful, then pushed her cart down the aisle. When she was gone, Mike turned to Laura. "That was gracious of you." "She's still our neighbor," Laura said. "Besides, she's already been punished. She has to live with her own bylaws." They both laughed, and that was the last time Karen's name came up in anything resembling conflict. By the time spring returned, the cabin felt less like a project and more like home. Mike built a small dock bench, and Laura planted lavender near the mailbox. A subtle reminder that even the place once synonymous with stress could grow something fragrant. The new HOA Sorry Council was thriving. No one missed fines or forms. The only official rule they adopted was rule number 1. Be decent. One afternoon, while Laura baked and the smell of sugar filled the air, Mike sat on the porch writing in a small notebook. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Notes," he said. "For a story." "About what?" He looked out over the lake, squinting against the sunlight. "About how peace isn't the absence of noise. It's knowing which noises to ignore." She smiled. "Add a line about wreaths." "Already did." As dusk fell, the neighborhood lights flicked on one by one. The faint clatter of dinner dishes carried from nearby porches, mingling with the smell of barbecue and pine. The lake glowed pink in the fading light. Laura leaned against the porch railing, watching fireflies blink over the water. "You ever think about how silly it all was?" she asked. "Every day," Mike said. "And how worth it turned out to be. Think anyone else will ever cause that kind of drama again?" He grinned. "Maybe. But if they do, I'm keeping copies of the bylaws ready to hand out as party favors." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes easy when the fight's behind you and the future feels light. The night settled in soft and quiet, the cabin windows glowing warm. Mike took one last look at the wreath swaying gently in the breeze. "So if your HOA ever sends you a letter like mine," he murmured, half to himself, half to the stars, "remember, calm is the loudest kind of revenge." And somewhere across the lake, faint and familiar, a car door shut, followed by the hum of an engine that didn't linger. Mike smiled. He raised his cup of coffee to the horizon and whispered, "Good night, Karen." The lake, in its infinite patience, rippled once and went still again.